Okay, now on to the parasympathetic nervous system. An overview. The parasympathetic nervous system originates from preganglionic neurons in the midbrain, pons, and medulla, and in the spinal cord segments S2, S3, and S4. It is sometimes called the craniosacral division because it is actually found inside the cranium because the brainstem is above the foramen magnum. So that's the cranial part. And it is called the craniosacral division because there are also spinal cord segments that have parasympathetic nervous system nuclei in them. So note the sympathetic nervous system was called the thoracolumbar division, and the parasympathetic nervous system can be called the craniosacral division. The parasympathetic nervous system has preganglionic axons that are long and myelinated and postganglionic axons that are short and unmyelinated. The ganglia of the parasympathetic nervous system are close to or within the target tissue. The postganglionic axons synapse on the target tissue, but they're very short and little. Okay, the parasympathetic nervous system, we're going to break it down. First, we're going to talk about the cranial nerves. So the preganglionic axons from this brainstem are carried on 4 cranial nerves: cranial nerve 3, the oculomotor nerve; cranial nerve 7, the facial nerve; cranial nerve 9, the glossopharyngeal nerve; and cranial nerve 10, the vagus nerve. And I kind of like our mnemonic, only 4 got visceral. And here's a picture of the different cranial nerves coming out of the brainstem. The oculomotor nerve is shown with an arrow that points to it in the diagram, and it comes forward from the brainstem. It's carrying some parasympathetic fibers on it, and in it comes, in it comes, in it comes, and then some of the fibers split off and go to a ganglia. These are the parasympathetic nervous system fibers. They sort of hop off and go to a ganglia. And then there are postganglionic axons beyond the ganglion neurons, which those are the cell bodies of the postganglionic axons. Well, the cell bodies of these neurons that have the postganglionic axons. Okay. Cranial nerve 3, the oculomotor nerve, carries parasympathetic nervous system commands to 2 intraocular eye muscles: the sphincter pupillae, which constricts the pupil, and the ciliary muscle that changes the shape of the lens of the eye. And here's a picture showing the sphincter pupillae, which is just around the hole that is the pupil in our eye. And under parasympathetic nervous system stimulation, the sphincter pupillae will contract. There is also a dilator pupillae muscle that surrounds the sphincter pupillae muscle, and this muscle is actually under the control of the sympathetic nervous system. So if the sympathetic nervous system is stimulated, then the pupil dilates because the dilator pupillae muscle contracts. Okay, now the ciliary muscle is a muscle that surrounds the lens of the eye, and the lens of the eye helps us focus. So the lens needs to have different shapes depending on whether we're using our far vision or our near vision. When we're using our far vision, the lens is flat, the fibers attached are tight, and the ciliary muscle fibers that surround the lens and the suspensory ligaments, the ciliary muscle fibers are relaxed. If the ciliary muscle fibers contract, the suspensory ligaments relax, and that relaxing allows the lens to go from being thin to being thick, and this helps us to focus for close vision. Okay, cranial nerve 7, the facial nerve, stimulates the lacrimal tear gland, mucus glands, and salivary glands of the face to increase secretions. And cranial nerve 9, the glossopharyngeal nerve, stimulates the parotid salivary gland to increase secretions. So here's a summary slide showing cranial nerve 3, the oculomotor nerve, going to the intraocular muscles of the eye, and then cranial nerve 7, the facial nerve, going to two different ganglia. We don't need to learn the names of the ganglia, but two different ganglia. And then from the ganglion, there's a neuron that goes to the lacrimal gland and has it make tears. And then there's another neuron that goes to salivary glands and increases saliva secretion there. Okay, so we went over three of the four cranial nerves that carry parasympathetic nervous system information, and they were interesting but rather minor. Cranial nerve 10, the vagus nerve, innervates the visceral organs in the thorax, abdomen, and pelvis. It accounts for 75% of the motor commands in the parasympathetic nervous system. The vagus nerve innervates the heart. It decreases the heart rate and the strength of contractions. It innervates the lungs. It decreases the respiratory rate and causes bronchoconstriction. The vagus nerve innervates the small intestines and up to the first half of the large intestine. It stimulates increased smooth muscle activity. It stimulates increased secretions by gastric and intestinal glands, the pancreas, and the liver. And it stimulates the secretion of hormones that are needed for nutrient absorption by cells. Here's a picture of the wanderings of the vagus nerve. Okay, now that was the cranial part of the parasympathetic nervous system. And now we will go down to the sacral part. The preganglionic axons from the spinal cord segments S2, 3, and 4 form pelvic nerves that travel to target organs. The pelvic nerves contract the bladder during urination. They stimulate defecation. They stimulate sexual glands and sexual arousal in both sexes. And here's just a picture. So, parasympathetic nervous system function. The parasympathetic nervous system usually inhibits its target tissue. However, it does stimulate food processing and energy absorption. It increases nutrients in the blood and increases cell anabolic metabolism and growth. It's often called the rest and digest division of the autonomic nervous system. In addition, it has an important role in sexual arousal. It is therefore sometimes called the feed and breed division. Clever, right? The parasympathetic nervous system may induce a freeze reaction that decreases the heart rate and movement. And here we have on the far left a possum playing possum, but we see a snake and frog, a little cute little frog, and a bird, all of which have just frozen up and fallen over with extremely decreased heart rate and movement. But they're actually not dead. They're just playing dead to scare off the threat. There's a summary slide for the parasympathetic division. Here's another summary slide. And now a word on divergence.